Hey everyone, welcome to this MatchPal webinar on Step 2 CK. We're going to be covering advice for Step 2, including which resources we recommend, how to structure your study schedule, and the steps that 260 plus scorers take that you should integrate to have your best performance on exam day. We hope you enjoy.
So welcome guys, welcome to Step 2 CK Decoded with MatchPal. My name is Dan, I'm a PGY4 Interventional Radiology resident. And with me, I have two fantastic colleagues, rockstar tutors with, I think between us three alone, we probably worked with like over 500 students. And we're really excited to talk about Step 2 CK. I know it's a big exam. We're going to talk about, the importance of it, the strategies, planning for it, question taking, like live question examples, and jam-packed with information that honestly a lot of schools and people just don't talk about or don't know about. So I'm going to hand it over to Ian and then Kyle to introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right in.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian. I'm a radiology resident in Wisconsin. Excited to be talking to y'all. As Dan said, a lot of experience tutoring with MatchPal and just really excited to share some knowledge tonight.
Hey everyone, I'm Kyle. I'm doing my TY year, but I will be starting radiology next year at UAB down in Birmingham. Super excited to talk to everybody, chat about MatchPal a little bit. Yeah, excited for tonight.
All right, let's do it. So we're going to cover a lot of material, guys, and let's see. So we're going to cover why the exam matters, how the exam is different from Step 1, which is the exam that hopefully at this point everyone here took already. We'll talk about the resources that we recommend using and how to use them, as well as making a study plan. And then we're going to talk about the differentiators that we see both in our practice for taking these exams and also in tutoring all the students that we worked with over the years. And what really distinguishes high scores from the students that kind of, miss the mark or don't exactly hit where they want to go. I think the number one question that everyone should be asking themselves is why are they here tonight? And we obviously know the answer. Step 2 is the single most important objective metric in the match right now, right? It's, Step 1 is pass fail. This is the biggest numerical differentiator that students have. If you look at these graphs, there's a pretty big difference in the match versus unmatched rate for many specialties. It's consistent regardless of whether you go to an MD or DO school. And it's a very big driver for getting filtered in and getting an interview at a program of your choice. So, the stakes are high. We already know that, but I think that there's data to support it. This isn't just kind of things that people are just circulating around for no reason. All right. So the test is a big deal. And I think, looking at specific specialties, maybe like anesthesia and some of the more competitive specialties, you can really see the impact of strong performance relative to the match outcome, right? Students who are, scoring at the, 250 plus are still only, maybe like a 75% chance, 260 plus over a 90% chance. So I think the implications here are that, with the average score being a 250 now, the bar has really shifted as far as what's considered impressive, what's considered powerful to differentiate yourself. And obviously this is not the only thing in your application. There's research and experiences and, letters of rec and your personal statement. But this is still a super important objective metric that PDs absolutely will use this cycle, as they have in all the past cycles, to evaluate whether or not you're, worthy of coming for an interview and matching at a specific program. All right, so the exam is different than Step 1. And I think this is what throws a lot of students off guard. And, maybe you guys have already seen this in your your shelf exam or COMAT prep, but there's a very different reward system for how Step 2 specifically gives away points, right? Step 1, if you memorize a bunch of stuff, you actually get a pretty good chunk of the way there. You are really rewarded for the volume of information that you can memorize. For Step 2, you absolutely need to know information, for sure. But there's a lot of reasoning and gamification of the exam that if you can master those skills, you actually will thrive way more than someone who just memorizes a large volume of facts, okay? And I think the most important things that we can tell you, if you walk away with nothing else from tonight, is that learning how to take this test is equally, if not more important than the knowledge that is on the test, okay? So keep that in mind as we cover all the material today and as you're going into your own dedicated study plans, all right? So with that, how do you study for a test that no longer rewards massive accumulation of information that maybe Anki and other resources were really helpful with during your Step 1 prep, right? I think Questions are really the curriculum here, right? So the volume of questions is the single most important metric that the data shows actually correlates to a higher score. So there's no like, oh, I'm going to do half of a Q bank or I'm going to do maybe one Q bank. Like if you're at this webinar and you're trying to score high, you need to be completing multiple Q banks, multiple NBMEs, multiple other resources. The more questions you see, the more times you see that information manipulated and spun at you in different angles, the more you're going to recognize the patterns that actually come up, and the more you're actually going to be able to see the new pattern on test day and say, oh, I've seen some version of this. I know exactly where this is going. And getting into the exam writer's mind, I think this is the biggest struggle that we see a lot of students have. They are taking the question at face value rather than taking the question as this is a game that the NBME plays, and I've seen this game 2 or 3 times. I know exactly what that answer choice means. I know exactly how to eliminate. I know exactly how to choose the effective thing. So I think questions, active learning, avoiding passive learning is also really critical. Okay. There's a big push in general for students to either read or watch videos, and those resources are fantastic, but they are not going to alone get you to a point where you can master this exam, because you're not able to recall and apply that information if all you do is absorb it. You have to practice the retrieval and the manipulation and the application of those concepts as you take this test. And I think that also goes for the review process, right? So Kyle, I guess maybe if you want to tell us a little bit about how would you instruct a student who's looking to score high? How do you instruct them on a really high-end review process? Like they're doing their UWorld block and they're doing it in timed mode, 40 questions, they finished it. How is the process looking like to review a specific block from a question bank?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're going back to review, the process is a little bit different for everybody, but at its core, you need to figure out why are you missing problems and what is the fundamental information you need to extract from that question. Some of them you're just looking through each answer choice and identifying what you don't know. Some of them, if you already know, say for this one, say you already know what ADH is, you know how thirst regulation can be impaired. You need to figure out what is causing you to pick one answer over the other. Maybe it is certain medication side effects you don't know. Maybe it's a congenital error you don't know. So basically, for each question, you have to figure out what piece of information are you missing? And furthermore, how can the NBME test writers use that on a different question to try and trick you in the future? So it's all about looking forward, and it's not necessarily just this problem, because you're not likely going to see the same exact problem again, but you are frequently going to see the same topics or the same differential tested against one another in a slightly different variant.
Yeah, and I think the classic example goes with thirst regulation, with sepsis, with hyperparathyroidism, right? These are all like anything that has arrows up and down, anything that where like changing one thing in the question stem completely changes the answer. That's the stuff that you have to do the mental gymnastics with, especially if you're here now in March. You have the time to start early and start changing the way you study to make sure that that's exactly how you start thinking in the exam writer's mind to say, well, if they changed one part of this question, which part would it be for A to be correct or B or C? And I think that becomes a super valuable strategy in giving you the skills needed to see the new version of that question that they're going to write on test day, because they know what's in UWorld, they know what's in AMBOSS. They're doing their absolute best to somehow test the same exact medicine without repeating the question, right? Because they don't want to give you freebies. They want to make you work for it. So if you do that mental gymnastics, there's only so many ways that you could do it. Some of them are captured in the question banks. Some of them are not. If you can go through that exercise, and then as you do more volume of this, you get better at it and faster at it. That's how you become really like unstoppable when it comes to test day. All right.
Yeah. I have one more thing to add. I will mention, building off what you said, it's a lot easier to get stuck on kind of like I don't know the best analogy, but kind of like getting stuck on a treadmill for step two. Like your score can stagnate even if you think you're learning new material. If you're not actively fixing your mistakes or how you're approaching problems, you're going to plateau at a certain level. Step one, it's a little bit easier to improve on and get to that pass because you really just have to hit your knowledge more. Like you just do more questions, you learn more esoteric facts, your score is going to go up. Step two, if you're not figuring out what you're missing, especially with best next step problems, your score is just not going to improve as it should. So a lot of this is more about testing mindset than just straight hammering content like in step one, which is still important, but there's a lot of more algorithmic thinking and like pattern identifying you need to do.
Absolutely. All right. So how do you set up, your resources, right? The resources are your tools. You have to think about which resources you're going to use, when and how you're going to use them, right? So we kind of touched upon a couple of these, but I think there's no secrets here that are on this slide, right? I think everyone on this call has probably heard of, if not all, most of these resources, but these are the ones that we really recommend. And there's a lot of other resources out there, but as far as the resources that we've seen that not only we used for our exams, but the resources that we use with our students that work, that produce real results, these are the ones that you have to master, right? So finishing UWorld, using all of especially the new NBME practice exams, the old forms that you may not have time for, but definitely all the new ones, definitely the CMS forms and free 120, right? You want to prioritize those at the top of the pyramid. So if you're dealing with a short dedicated period, if you're dealing with a time crunch or you're working slowly in the beginning and you don't have time to do that other stuff, this is the must do, okay? Especially the NBME and CMS forms in addition to UWorld. And the reason why we recommend that instead of something like OMBUS or some other question bank is that's material from the exam writer, right? Like you have to be silly to not do questions that the exam writer literally gave you to practice on, right? They're showing you how they think, how they write questions, what topics they care about. Do them, right? You have to do them, and you have to not only do them, but apply the information that we just talked about, the strategy that we just talked about earlier, in how you review them and how you understand the question being written, the answers being selected, right? If you look at a sample question, they're not throwing unrelated topics as answer choices, right? They're throwing very similar things, and you have to really get into the pattern of recognizing why certain answer choices are constantly grouped together and why the question variables change to pick one over the other. I'm a big fan of Anki. So I've been using Anki for, my step one, step two, step three. I'm using it in residency now. I think it's a phenomenal tool. My biggest thing with Anki, especially when I meet new students, is that they don't use it properly, okay? Anki is meant to be a tool that reinforces the weak areas that you have. So you don't just download a deck from the internet and just do all the cards in the deck. It's a horrible way to use it. You'll waste a ton of time, and you'll probably get not a great amount of value out of it because you're going to be doing Anki for 6 hours a day and you're not going to be doing enough questions. So the way to use Anki properly is to actually unsuspend the cards as you encounter topics that you feel that you're weak at. A question that you got wrong, a topic that you haven't seen in a while or maybe never saw at all. That's when you go into Anki, you search for that term, you unsuspend the card, and you put it into your rotation. And the goal is, you want to keep your Anki overall the goal is not to put all the information into Anki and then do hours and hours of flashcards. Like I really can't emphasize that enough. I mean, when I was studying for step two, I was limiting my Anki to about an hour a day. So literally like 20 to 40 new cards, 300 reviews, that's it. And then the rest of the day was just questions and review and questions and review and questions and review and rinse and repeat. So that's what the mindset that I want you guys to have. I think, again, a lot of people are scared of Anki. I think it's because they don't know how to use it and because they think they have to finish the deck. They download a deck, they download a 20,000 card deck or a 15,000 card deck, and they're like, how will I ever do this? And of course, yeah, I get it. It's like super overwhelming. That is a crazy goal to try to accomplish. But if you use it properly, it can be an amazing tool. I think if anyone here is looking for a second question bank, we're very big. We're partners and supporters of Amboss. I think it's the second best bank that really emulates the style of the NBME. They have a fantastic library that basically allows you to look up topics. So if you guys are not familiar with it, definitely check it out. And we'll send you guys a discount code in the follow-up email after this call for you guys to explore that. And I think if anyone here is commuting a lot, right? So if you're driving to the hospital or you have other things you're doing, I think Divine Intervention Podcast, that guy was great. I used him throughout my whole step two, like throughout all of MS3. Anytime I was going to the hospital, anytime I was doing anything, I had Divine on in the car. And honestly, like that guy's great. Like super, super highly recommend. It's a free resource on Spotify. And it's a great way to just like add learning to parts of your life where you may not have been learning. And I don't recommend watching a podcast instead of doing questions. Okay. Definitely don't do that. But this is designed to be providing you something to listen to, whether you're at the gym or cooking or driving, when you otherwise may not have been in front of a computer screen to give you the opportunity to get exposure to high yield information. Any other resources, Ian or Kyle, that you want to add here?
I'll just say one thing. So I think I got a question in a private message. Essentially, the person asked, okay, I completed UWorld. Do I do a second pass of UWorld or I do a different question bank like Amboss? So I'd love to hear your guys' opinions, but I'll say what I think. It's number of unique practice questions that you have seen that is going to correlate with better exam performance. Um, I don't really care what order you do the Q banks. If you do them like simultaneously, they kind of have a different presentation, so it might not honestly be a bad idea to do them kind of at the same time and try to have them both completed by the time you hit your exam date. I think Amboss is the second best question bank. I think you should do both of them prior to your step two exam date. I'll talk about this a little later too when we get to question strategy. Amboss has a lot of features that other question banks don't have that help you, especially if you go through on tutor mode, stimulate those sorts of like higher order thinking, like what kind of question is being asked here? What are the pieces of information in the question stem that I should be like, my eyes should be glowing at, and I should be like, oh my gosh, I know what this is about. It's going to underline those for you. And then you can like think about that before you pick your answer choices. You can think about each answer choice. They can give you a hint if you're not quite at the level where you're ready to commit to an answer. That can kind of like train you, especially if you are struggling on your own with UWorld, to be able to develop that next level reasoning skill. Maybe you don't have the opportunity to work with a tutor or someone who can give you those next level reasoning tips. That might be the best option, but Amboss is a great second choice because of those additional tools it provides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll echo exactly what Ian said. Basically, it's number of unique practice questions. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of Amboss. I would arguably put it head to head with UWorld in terms of questions. It's a little different. I know it's not the gold standard, but there's a lot to like about it, especially for any MS2s out there. Worth thinking about maybe putting a deck aside for dedicated and one for clinicals. Amboss is great for clinicals because it's a little bit easier to go by specific topic. You can search, there's like a very strong search function, and you can create decks not only by, say you're in, I don't know, say you're in medicine, you can not just go by medicine, but you could go like GI and then biliary disorders. Like you can fine tune it and make it super granular, which is really helpful when you start a new rotation and you have no idea what's going on, but you want to start hitting practice questions. It's really easy to ease yourself in that way. So, um, yeah, huge fan of both banks.
Yeah, I think just to add one more thing on that feature, I think especially if you encounter a topic, let's say you're studying and you're doing Amboss or UWorld, you're doing a random block, and now you're like, I got nephrotic syndrome wrong. You can go to Amboss and build a 5 question set of just nephrotic syndrome, and that's like that. No other question bank can do that. So I think that's like really cool. All right, let's do a live case strategy example. So Kyle's going to walk us through how to go over a NBME UWorld Amboss question properly, the right way, the match palette. All right. So I think, we'll talk about the strategy of how to approach a question, and then we'll kind of do a little bit of like interactive discussion. So Kyle, why don't you kind of start us off? Tell us like, you got to, you see this question, where do your eyes go first? How do you think about the information, the answer choices? And then is there anything that, if let's say everyone here in the audience is Kyle's student right now for a live tutoring session, what's the first question you'd ask them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I like to ask all of my students is, well, first of all, you have to get a feel for their strategy, what they find comfortable, because we have strong recommendations on what we believe works best. But it's ultimately what's going to work best for your student. Now, what I would start with for everybody, where you want to start is reading the very end of the stem. You're going to read the question they're asking you, because ultimately that's what we care to find out. So in our case, we have a best next step question. Which is going to be different than saying what's a risk factor for this question or anything else. So they're literally looking for clinical management. Then I like to go to the top. I tell my students to go to the top, and we're going to scan through. We're going to highlight important pieces. We're going to think as we go through, how does it build on each other? So for example, this first line, a 31-year-old woman comes to the office for follow-up of an abnormal pap test. There's a ton of information in there. We have a 31-year-old woman who's outpatient. That's going to be drastically different than a 75-year-old coming to the ER after an MVC and who's going to need immediate attention. So a big part of step two is recognizing the setting you're in. not only the setting, but basically how drastic or like how intensive you want to get on your treatment.
Yeah, the acuity. Absolutely.
EQ, 100%. So, um, I'm just going to give you guys a quick second to scan through this, but what sort of things are you thinking about? Like, what information do you need to know to answer this question? What pathologies or what things do you need to know to help answer it?
Yeah, put it. Yeah, let's have everyone put their thoughts in the chat. So, you're reading this question. What's the first thing that stands out to you? That like, what are they testing here?
Exactly. So, they've already done some diagnostic test. They're basically asking us, what do you do for a PAP? So, for you to understand this, you have to first of all know what you're testing with a PAP. Where is the locational site? What exactly HSIL versus LSIL means, and how do you follow up with that? Some things I'll mention, like the nice thing about step two questions with next best step, you honestly don't have to be an expert on any of this pathology. Obviously, it's good to be because you drastically increase your chances of getting it right. But for example, on this one, say you don't remember the PAP algorithm incredibly well. There's a lot to know in medicine. You will forget things. That's why it's super important to have strong fundamentals on how to approach these questions, which we'll get into in a minute.
All right. So,
So go ahead.
no, take it away.
All right. So as you can see, this one is endocervical curettage. UWorld's great. We've already told you how great UWorld is. You get these wonderful explanations. They tell you what each answer choice is. Like, for example, B is endometrial biopsy. What does that mean? What are you finding out on it, etc. So it gives you a ton of great info. But sometimes, especially for best next step, it kind of just spits facts at you, but it's not detailed each question. Like it's not necessarily telling you why it's not this answer, not that answer, in always the most helpful ways. Um, so that's where working with the tutor can be really helpful because you can understand basically what other avenues are there to answer this question based other than just the discrete facts.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand how to manipulate the different tests as well, right? Like different tests are going to be used at different times, and I think especially in this case, if we're just going to go back here, right? This is like a relatively new finding in an otherwise relatively healthy patient, and I think that is going to be something that you have to think about, like what if this person was older and had chronic additional findings? Like that would definitely conflate which test you would choose, right? And the same thing as you were alluding to earlier, in an acute setting, certain imaging modalities or certain tests are going to be preferred over others. And I think that's just like extremely important to hammer in. Like again, getting to this point of yes, sure, this is the next best step, and then moving on, you leave a lot of learning on the table. And I think that's the main thing that we want to emphasize is that sure, you can go through the question bank and you can definitely get a bunch of facts in and unlock some cards and improve the score a little bit. But I think going that extra step and really understanding in which scenario, how would this patient's presentation and scenario have to change in order to get to answer choices C, D, and E, that's what makes you a phenomenal test taker. Ian, do you want to add anything to this specifically?
Yeah. So one thing that this kind of brings to mind is like Kyle's bringing up a good point that this isn't really showing you like on this question example what is like the flow chart for management of this complaint of this concern. In your head, you might be thinking, okay, what if this was like LSIL, or what if this was atypical squamous cells of uncertain significance? And I think you already brought this up, Dan, but if you're having those questions, this is when you then go to Anki and unsuspend the card that has the URL flowchart on this algorithm because you weren't really able to manipulate that data in your head. When you were going through the question, maybe you had a hard time identifying like what was the important information. And I think there's a couple keys here with like this question strategy and review strategy. And this is why it takes like 1 to 2 hours to review your block of 40 questions, is you have to be able to identify what kind of question is this? What before I reveal the answer choices, before I reveal the answers, was I able to pick out all the pieces of info in the STEM that were relevant, not just like the one that got me to the right answer? Because there's going to be distractors that might try to get you into a distractor answer. You have to know why that's wrong. There's going to be additional pieces of like hints that aren't like the clinching thing in your head, but did you recognize those? And as I said, again, using Amboss, it can kind of like guide you through that. Working with a tutor can kind of help you with that. Or just like really taking your time and reflecting on each question. That's really important. There's also time and place to go really fast with questions and try to be able to be like, how accurate can I get going really fast? Because I know on exam day, it might be hard to get through every single block of 40. So also having an intention with when you're doing these practice questions. Am I trying to like dive really deep on each question before clicking answer? Or am I trying to like build up my speed? All of those things I think are really important things to consider and have a strategy and intention as you go through this.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that a lot of students do struggle with is the stamina and endurance. I think stamina can be built by, you know, having long days consistently. I think like that does improve stamina. If you're doing 120 questions a day, it's going to help you sustain a long test day. But I think speed is something that just comes with also comfort, right? And also having really strict rules. And we'll talk about that in like the study plan mindset in a second. But speed also, comes both with experience and also being able to actually, have those rules for yourself. So let's talk about building a study schedule, because I know we got a lot of questions about this in the sign up forms. So everyone here is going to probably have a slightly different amount of time for dedicated. I had like a 4 week dedicated for step two. Some people, might have 6 to 8 weeks. Some people might be like, if you're off cycle or you just have an extended dedicated period for some reason, you might have even more time. I think it's really important that regardless of how long your dedicated is, it's how you structure it that makes the difference. Okay. So don't be like nervous. That's like the biggest take home message here. Don't be nervous if you just have a 4 week dedicated. Like you absolutely can still do very, very well. You just need to be able to put the right resources in front of yourself efficiently during that time period, and you will be okay. All right. So my daily schedule looked like this, right? So I woke up, I did that hour Anki that I told you guys about. I promise you it was real, right? I did it very intentionally. It was just on the stuff that I had struggled with, and blasted through it and moved straight into practice questions. Now, historically, the advice was always do sets of 40 for 60 minutes. I don't know if you guys saw our video today on our socials, but the NBME just announced that they're changing the exam format. So same number of questions, same length of the exam, but the exam is now 20 question blocks that are 30 minutes. So instead of 8 blocks for step one and 9 blocks for step two, there's now basically double that. Okay. So you got to be prepared to be taking these 30-minute intervals, right? So now the advice changes. I mean, I still want you guys to do 120 questions a day, but I want you to do them in 30-minute blocks to train yourself to be able to perform in that. And I think the biggest limitation here is that when you take let's say you take a 60-minute block for 40 questions, let's say you finish in like 55 minutes, that technically leaves you 5 minutes to review all of the questions that you flagged or wanted to go back on. And even though I'm not a fan of changing answers, I actually tell everyone to never change answers. I'm very, very anti that. Unless you like caught a glaring error that you made by complete accident, never change your answer. I think this kind of shortens that. So now, you're going for like finishing in 27, 28 minutes, and then you have 2 minutes to review 20 questions, whatever was flagged from that 20 question block. And I think it's just important to plan for this stuff, because our bodies, and I talk about this like in a later slide too, but like our bodies are very, we're creatures of habit, right? We like to get used to certain things. And if you train the body and the mind to continuously perform in certain intervals, that makes the test a lot less daunting, because you're used to doing these 20 question, 30-minute blocks all the time. All right. End of day, what I like to do, this might work for some people. Some people might do this like during the blocks. It just might extend your time. But like you always want to leave time to actually unsuspend those cards and review weak concepts, whether you're using Amboss or videos or whatever it is. Leave time every day, about an hour, to do all of that. So you can do that during the block if you're either really fast or you don't mind that like gap. I kind of didn't like doing that because I wanted to just do questions, do a brief review, jot down the topics, do a deep dive later, but then just jump to the next block. So I wanted to get as many questions in like as early in the day as possible. Some people might want to do it in the middle of the block. That's when they're seeing the concepts freshest. So it's kind of a dealer's choice there. I also think practice exams are critical. I don't know, Ian or Kyle, if you guys want to tell us like a little bit about like structuring or like any specific practice exams that you guys like recommend.
Yeah, I can start. I think practice exams are really kind of like your guideposts in your study period, right? When you are doing UWorld, Amboss, whatever question bank, you're going to be kind of at this fluctuating like percent correct. But when you simulate exam conditions and then see how you do, like 1 week to the next week, it is kind of like your guidepost on if you're really like making the progress, if you're plateauing. And the thing that I will advise everybody on is, especially if you decide to use older forms that maybe don't have like the up-to-date like information on where you are relative to everyone else. They usually have data somewhere on the internet, like deep dark trenches of the internet, about like what is like the mean score for this practice exam. It might not be the same thing. It might not like be scaled the exact same way as like 250 being the average. It might be a practice exam where people score like 235 as the mean score. So I just be wary if you're going to use non-active, non-live practice exams, because those can kind of be a little bit all over the place. But yeah, they're your guideposts. They're really important. Complete as many NBMEs as possible and complete both your world self-assessments. Amboss often gives the free self-assessment once per year as well. I would always take advantage of a free exam if I had the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're getting a lot of questions about like how to integrate exactly like so many NBMEs and CMS forms. I think it's a really good question, especially if you have a short dedicated. So, ideally you're taking like one or two a week, right? And you can do this. You can do two in one day to get more reps in because the NBMEs are 200 questions long. So, I mean, you could do like two NBMEs and a U-roll block or two. That'll not only give you like exam day simulation, but it'll also give you the opportunity to see a ton of questions in one day. It's going to exhaust you. It's also going to take a ton of time to review, honestly, but it's worth it because you got to, you got to do it. I think prioritizing the new NBMEs, very important, right? So like if you have an option, if you can only do some, prioritize the new ones. I think for CMS forms, I would start by doing again, we're talking about the time limited person who can't necessarily finish everything all at once. I think prioritizing, at least one CMS form per rotation or per subject matter area is probably a good place to start. That would make the most sense to me, just so you get a sense of like what types of questions they're asking for each system. I mean, internal medicine and surgery are historically weighted a little bit heavier on the exam than the other subjects. So if you needed to start pulling a second form or a third form, I would probably think about going for those rather than peds or OBGYN. But that is just some frameworks to think about. Again, in 4 weeks, it's going to be tight. You're going to need to be doing 120 to 160 a day every single day, basically, for 4 weeks. If you want to get all of this done. And even then, you're not going to finish necessarily everything. But if you cover the full question bank plus a bunch of these exams and forms, you're getting a very, very broad overview of like all of the high yield stuff, right? It's going to be a really tough grind, but it's doable. And you definitely can still score high with that kind of a setup. And I think, obviously like passing is like 218 now. I mean, we're not even talking about passing on this test. All of you guys are going to pass. Hopefully that's the plan. So, if you're here, and I think it's all about like, how do you get to like the higher scores? So like, 75+% is really like what I was always shooting for. Like, I mean, if you're in the 80s, you're golden. But if you're like 75+%, you're good. Like you're in a good place. Like you don't need to like freak out. You're very well positioned to make sure that you actually have a good test day outcome. I know we kind of talked about this already, so this is just kind of reinforcing that idea. I think the one thing that I would add here is that don't sleep on stats and ethics. Okay, this is stuff that appears in every single block. There's a couple of questions on both. They want to know that you know how to be an ethical physician. They want to know that you can interpret scientific data and apply different formulas and different like understandings of statistics to that data. So that is going to come up on literally every block, and you need to get comfortable with it, and you need to make time to learn it if you're shaky in it, because a lot of students are. So just be aware of that, and just understand that like 10% of this test, if not more on some forms, because they vary, is going to be stats and ethics. That's a lot, right? Like if you know 90% of it reasonably well and you don't know any of that stuff, like you're not going to score in the top performing percentiles, right? So you have to know, you have to make sure that you have time to cover that both during your dedicated and also in the days leading up to the test. And the last thing I'll say is the free 120. So I think we talked about this earlier. Free 120 is like typically like the single most predictive thing. If you like, go for the 75 or 80 on that. I like to tell students to take it 3 days before their actual test day. And yeah, don't look at that until like literally a few days before your test. And the other thing I will mention, I want to talk about like the habits. Maybe we'll get Kyle and Ian's perspective on this too. But I think routine matters incredibly. Like you need to like wake up and go to sleep the same time every single day during dedicated. The same time that you're gonna take your test. So if you're testing at 8 a.m. and you know that you need to drive an hour to the test center, and you need like 30 minutes to like wake up and make your coffee and blast some music and get in the zone. You should be waking up at 6:30 every single day, like no stop, like every single day for a month. Like you should be taking questions at 8 a.m. at your desk every single day for a month. Again, creatures of habit. These are small things. They sound cheesy. They sound weird. They sound like they don't work. They do, right? Like your sleep will be better. Your clarity will be better. Your performance will be better. Trust me on that. So I think that's the big thing that I want to emphasize on habits. I know we covered some of these things here. Ian, Kyle, anything else on habits, mindset, coming into dedicated? How are we kind of like, yeah, or what are some things that worked for you? What are some things that you would want to coach students through?
Yeah. So one thing I like to say, and this is especially going to be important for our MS2s, is honestly the prep for step two starts day one of your clinicals. Dedicated is super important. We cannot overstate the importance, but ultimately all this learning starts when you start clinicals, because that is where you can set your strong foundation. And when you come into dedicated, you really should just be doing the fine tuning and just like kind of putting the polishing touches on things. So the more you can do throughout the year, and as you get closer to dedicated, like already starting to think about, hey, I've got like a really easy rotation or a research rotation a month or two before I take my exam. Like you can do a diagnostic exam, or like start to go through CMS forms. So really, the earlier you can start thinking about this and integrating it into your schedule, the better. Even if you're not going full tilt, 120 questions per day, even if you can get 20 questions in per day, that's great. Like the earlier you can start putting in consistent work, the better.
Yeah,
100%.
I totally agree. I don't remember if we talked about this specifically already, but high level exam performers usually are people who think about some of these things earlier, right? Kind of like Kyle is saying, if you're still in your clinicals and you're still going through shelf content, you should be every single day doing some review of past shelves so that when you start day one of dedicated, that past content is not completely alien to you. You're not starting over. Whether this is Anki, whether this is integrating practice questions that are just random, like doing random practice questions in addition to practice questions from your specific shelf topic that you're studying for, or some other resource that uses these evidence-based learning methods. You need to be doing this your entire clinical year if you want to maximize your effectiveness. It's not too late to start now, if you are like near the end of clinicals, even if you haven't had these habits. But that's like a really key habit that high performers use so that when they're hitting dedicated, the things they're optimizing are like, I'm getting really fast at doing these blocks and I have time to like do this pretty effortlessly. I'm getting really good at dissecting these question stems and I have time to like go through each question, like think about each answer choice individually and like really have those next level kind of discussions that we were talking about. If you are still like needing to like go back and think about that information from IM, that was your first rotation that you kind of forgot, you're not gonna have as great of an opportunity to do your best.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the people in this call are current third years in their last rotation or second to last rotation. Like a lot of people are fall into that bucket. The biggest piece of advice I could tell you is start now. Okay, do not wait till dedicated to start doing any of this stuff. Start approaching your shelf exam prep with the skills and strategies that we just covered. Start approaching start incorporating review of old material. I know it's hard. I know there's not enough time. I know you're in the hospital, but start doing a little by little. The more you do now, and the more you modify your approach to using Anki, to using these question banks now, the better of a place you're going to be come day one of dedicated versus not having done any of that. And that actually provides a ton of benefit that I cannot state enough personally. Um, the students that kind of wait until dedicated day one to be like, all right, so like, what's my plan today? Like, how am I going to do the next 4 weeks? Like, you already dropped the ball, right? That's why we're doing this in March, not in June. So a lot of students also here are prepping for COMLEX in addition to USMLE. I know we have a big deal audience. Me and Kyle both took COMLEX and USMLE. Wanted to give a quick shout out to how we prepped for that. So historically, I always, this is what I did. This is what I tell all my students to do. Always take USMLE first, right? So plan to take USMLE and then give yourself 3 to 7 days to one, take a day off and just chill, and then take 2 to 7 days to actually review OMM and learn all of the high yield OMM stuff, right? I know we have OMM Bootcamp. If you don't know about it and you're a DO, you should definitely check it out. It's like the most comprehensive video-based resource for OMM review. We have tons of videos and practice questions covering everything that the COMLEX likes to test for level 1 and 2. And I think a tool like that with, maybe your school gives you TrueLearn or ComQuest, like that is beyond enough. Watching those videos, doing those questions, you're golden for literally any OMM question that the COMLEX will throw at you on test day. And don't forget, for the DOs in the audience, OMM is 10 to 15% of the exam, okay? That's dedicated OMM questions. And then there's another 20 or 30% that are OMM adjacent, meaning they're not necessarily testing an OMM principle, but they are including OMM information that if you know it, the question becomes like 10 times easier. So COMLEX is a little bit of a different beast. A lot of other issues, problems, and strategies that pertain to it that we can talk about offline if you guys are interested. But don't sleep on OMM and time it this way, and your score does matter. I think we get that question from students a lot. If I'm taking USMLE and COMLEX doesn't matter. I'm just going to focus on STEP. Like, that's the wrong approach, because if you end up in a 250, 260 on STEP and you end up in a 500 on COMLEX, which that's not a great score. That's not the equivalent score. It's not going to look consistent, right? You want to have a reasonably consistent performance across the exams. So definitely check out OMM Bootcamp. And if you guys have any questions about specifically COMLEX stuff, happy to talk about it offline. So these are the things that we've seen students kind of not do the best at that can be improved. And we want to give you guys this is like a trance of under the veil. After working with like hundreds of students, this is like the things that lead students astray. All right. So not doing the question strategy that we kind of beat to death at this point, that's like number one, right? So kind of just like taking it as like factual information and then not really doing the deep dive. I think that's a big one. I think not having a plan that actually allows you to cover all of the resources that you need to have a high score is another one that is a common thread. I think a lot of students misinterpret or underestimate how many questions they need to do in order to do extremely well in this test, and they get disappointed with their score. I think not having someone to lean on to not only keep you accountable, but also like go through difficult concepts, go through strategy. I think that's another big one. We definitely help with that. People have study partners, people work with tutors, whatever it is, having someone that you lean on during this time, it's going to be a really difficult and stressful time. Having someone that is your kind of, your person for exam related stuff is critical. The other thing is the scores. I think a lot of people freak out when they see one score drop, right? Maybe they're getting in the 60s, 65 all week in UWorld, and they take an NBME and they got a 58. And now they freak out and they completely like change everything. They're like, I need to change up the whole thing, instead of actually understanding why they got a 58, what kind of stuff they got wrong, and working on it and looking to see what the next NBME showed, right? If you have a rock solid plan, and after tonight, I really hope you all do to some extent, you should stick to it, right? The plan is evidence-based. don't deviate from an evidence-based plan because of one drop, right? You will have days where the block scores are worse than others. You will have practice exams where you fumble. The goal is to learn so that test day doesn't end up like that. Okay. So just keep that in mind as you go through this process. And the last one, my favorite one of them all is like students that don't work on the actual weak areas. Okay. It's so easy to want to learn the stuff that you're good at. It's like a human nature thing. Like we all we gravitate towards the topics we find interesting, the pathologies that we know. It's so easy to do that. Make sure that you fight that urge, because every time you fight that urge and you go on a deep dive on a topic that you think is the worst thing in the world, that's where you make gains. Like that's where the scoring increases come from. And everything is really important, not just the thing that you're going into, not just, I'm interested in psych, so I'm going to know psych excellently and I'm going to kind of like do an okay job at everything else, right? Everything is really important. Fight that urge. Obviously, if you guys need help, that's what our team is here for. We're more than happy to work with anyone here on study planning and working through question strategies, making sure that you feel confident and working through any weak areas that you have for, we work with students on all of this stuff, right? Like everything from difficult concepts to strategy to how to set up a plan that is unique to your timeline. That's exactly what having someone in your corner is all about. And we've worked with hundreds of students from across the country over the years and we've had some fantastic results. So that's something if you're interested in, we'll give you guys an opportunity to chat with us later about it. And I know everyone's in MS3. We also work with a ton of students for not only the exams, but also the match process. So we have advisors in every specialty. I know we have a radiology dominant panel tonight. But we do have advisors in every single specialty, and we've helped students navigate through VSLO and ERAS and interviews, all those high impact moments that students are, either misguided upon or don't have the right tools or mentors in their corner. That's what our team is here for. This is what we love to do. And we've been doing this for 4 years now. And we've helped a lot of students along the way to not only navigate these exams to the best of their ability, but also match into their actual dream program. So if you guys are interested in either of that, we definitely welcome you to scan the QR code. We can schedule a free call with our team. And while you guys are doing that, I know we covered a ton of information. So, drop a question and let us help kind of facilitate a discussion. And if there's anything that's left here, we're happy to answer it. And we'll see you guys on the next one for those of you that'll be joining us. All right, let's see. So
can I start with one? I've had a ton of people asking me about TrueLearn.
Let's do it.
TrueLearn's fine. It's not a great resource. It's definitely inferior to UWorld and Amboss. But it's okay, especially if you want to get into the COMLEX mindset, because the questions just are not great. A lot of the time they're very vague and very short stems. It puts you in that mindset because TrueLearn is written the same way. So what I tell students is you can pepper in a question, like a 5-block question here and there. And as you get closer to your exam, as you get closer to your COMLEX, you can do a couple more and start to ramp that up a little bit. So it shouldn't be your main learning source, but it is really helpful to get sort of the verbiage and the question style down.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a good learning tool. The only thing that it does well is it emulates the really poorly worded style of the COMLEX. And, again, anyone here who's done both exams already for step 1, level 1, I mean, it's the USMLE is written like an art, like an art project, and the COMLEX is written like a kindergartner's, glue and crayons and stitched together. It's just so different. The overall, half of the battle with COMLEX tends to be actually being able to dissect and decipher what they're even asking you rather than actual medicine. And that's just a feature, not a bug. So TrueLearn does a good job in Conquest at emulating that style. But as far as it being a good learning tool, I would not vouch for it. I got another question about correlation between COMAT performance and STEP performance. Or are the MD and DO exams very distinct? I think the style is distinct. I don't think there's an actual correlation that you can put your money on. I think that generally speaking, if you've honored all of your COMATs or shelf exams, you are within reason in a great position to then have an easier time during dedicated and have a higher score. But I don't think it's necessarily like a 1-for-1. I mean, that being said, if you failed a bunch of your COMATs, I mean, you're probably not in a fantastic place, right? You're probably not in a fantastic place for getting 250 or 260. I think I got another question here about using UWorld, TrueLearn, and ComQuest to finish all the questions in UWorld, TrueLearn, and ComQuest for that COMAT. By the time dedicated starts, I won't have any questions left. Well, thankfully, we recommended so many other resources that you should definitely take advantage of. If you already finished UWorld and TrueLearn, which is great, by the way, that means you're in a really good position. You should use AMBOSS and CMS and NBME forms, right? So those are all the tools that you should be leaning on once you get to once you get to dedicated, if you already ran out of those initial questions. All right. What if your school requires you to do TrueLearn, finish the bank, and make certain scores in your blocks to be cleared? How do you suggest integrating that? You should do both, right? I mean, if you have a mandate for your school to sit for a test, then you got to fill that mandate. Unfortunately, that's how it works. You got to follow the rules, right? But at the same time, you should be, those mandates. I mean, we've worked with a lot of students that have had to deal with that. Those mandates are typically not that rigorous. I've never seen a school recommend that a student does 120 or 160 a day. So do whatever the mandate is, fill the rest of the day with the UWorld or AMBOSS. That's what I'd recommend until you get to the point where you're cleared, and then just transition to just one.
I can take this next one about the 20 and 40 question block.
Yeah.
This is still a new change, so ideas and thoughts about this may evolve, but I would say start off the morning with a block of 40, and especially that'll be easier in the morning, like you will have more stamina. And after that, you could honestly just do blocks of 20. I'm actually a big fan of having my students do 20 question blocks earlier and dedicated just as they start to build up focus. But I think if you start with 40 and do 20 the rest of the day, you get a benefit of both. Ultimately, I think it's a bit of a personal decision between, what you want to do. But if you mix and match, I think it's not a problem.
All right, let's see what else we got. What method do you recommend to work through the review process? Oh man, we spent so much time going through this. I think you're gonna have to subscribe to YouTube to get the recording of this webinar to go through that. We spent a lot of time. That was a deep discussion. Do you guys have an order in which
I just wanted to say something. So I think that webinar discount code temporarily wasn't working. Should be working now, everybody. Okay, so use webinar discount code webinar15 for 15% off any products. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. So then there's another question. Do you guys have an order to take the practice exams? I think the most important thing is take the practice exams, but prioritize newest exams versus older ones, right? So, because you may not always have time to do all of them. If you do, the order doesn't really matter, but maybe do the newer ones later. But if you only have time for one or two, pick the newer ones, because the newer ones tend to be more representative of the direction that the NBME is going into in the current landscape. And they do release them not infrequently. So they clearly are changing something, right? There's a reason why they keep releasing them.
The other thing I'll add on that, you will see a lot of discourse online on 12 is really hard or 10 or whatever. You have to take some of that with a grain of salt. Like ultimately they're released by NBME. They're all curved the same way. So really you should, like Dan said, just take them newest and work backwards. Like don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Don't be afraid of an exam. Like you just got to take it. And ultimately you'll find that your scores probably aren't going to line up with what other people think what is hard and what's easy. It's just kind of random information you find online. So I would just keep it simple. One less thing to worry about, and just like Dan said, start and work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Let's see what else. It's got a couple of minutes left. These are all great guys, by the way. Keep them coming. Practice COMAT on the NBME. I've done both, but it's hard. Yeah, I mean, I would prioritize step 2 prep. I wouldn't prioritize any additional stuff from the COMLEX or NBME besides OMM specific stuff. So yeah. How do you fit all this? Yeah, well, we talked about prioritizing things for 4 weeks already. Any advice on stamina after 140? I can't seem to do more questions, especially my rotation schedule. So I think 40 questions a day while you're on
That's
service
actually really good.
is, yeah, that's actually like really good. I think a lot of people struggle to even do 20. So I think you're in a good place, Rahul. It's a great question. I think 120, when we say 120, like we're talking about,
Dedicated. Yeah.
dedicated, right? Not like on rotation.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll just say everybody, like if you start earlier, it gives you more time. You can, if you don't have the stamina to do 40 after rotation and fully review it, that is actually pretty understandable. We were saying it's 3 hours if you're like doing a really excellent job. If you are on a rotation like surgery where they're keeping you 5 to 6 or something like that, you're not going to have 3 hours. It just is what it is. So don't hold yourself to an unrealistic standard that's going to make you burn out, or you're just not going to be reviewing the questions as well. So think about how much time do I actually have to study and do the best that you can in that amount of time. Be hold yourself to a high standard, but be realistic. There's certain rotations where you're not going to hit 40 questions a night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Think of it, everything you do during, the rotations is like shelf prior. You're prioritizing the shelf, and then anything after that is just icing on the cake, you know? Um, what else do we got? Is there another way to review content besides Anki? Wondering if any panelists used another method. I think we were all Anki users. I mean, Kyle, were you Anki also or no? I know Ian was, right?
Absolutely. But like you said, almost everyone falls into the trap of doing way too much at one point. So you have to just absolutely do a minimalist approach, like start tiny, unlock less than you think. And even then, you might have too many cards at one point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will say there is like a startup cost to Anki, right? I do think it's worth the investment to get involved because it is a tool that ultimately saves you so much time because all other act like active recall spaced repetition tools, the only difference is that they require you to do more work. Essentially, Anki like does it for you. But I will say if the startup burden is too high for you to be able to do it, there are alternatives, right? If you want to say I'm going to do like targeted review of this topic, I don't want to like go and suspend Anki cards. Like Kyle mentioned earlier, go do targeted review in Amboss on that topic. Save articles in Amboss that you think you might want to review, write things down to come back to, and like look up just like don't take notes, but jot down things that you need to come back to maybe a couple of times in the next week before your exam date because you know you're not strong on it. Look at the rule diagram. I'm going to look at these things that I put to the side to look at and review. It's a similar principle, but Anki really does save you time in the long run.
I think there was one last question that I want to address that I think is a lot is a one that we may not have touched super deeply on, which is, do you go by topic or do you go random? Okay. I think it depends on how long your dedicated is. If you're doing like 4 week dedicated, absolutely random all the way for sure. If you have a longer time, like if you have 8 weeks, I am not opposed for some students in some situations to go and do a short stint deep dive into each topic for like maybe a total of 3 weeks, 3 or 4 days per topic. Go as deep as you can, learn as much as you can, and then switch to random after. I think that's fine. I think, random and timed is the gold standard, right? The exam is random and timed. You need to train to perform random and time without the bias and without knowing that. But if you need to brush up on a couple of weak areas at the start of dedicated and you have the time, I don't think it's unreasonable to give it a shot. I just don't think it's for everyone. All right. Ryan, if you're interested in chatting with us, just scan the QR code and we'll reach out. We'll set up a call with you. All right. We're at the top of the hour, so we got a lot of good questions. Not enough time, as usual. So you guys have been great. If you guys want to chat with us or work with us, just scan the QR code. We'll be happy to talk to you, see if working with us with our team is the right thing for you. And otherwise, it's been awesome engaging with you all. Thanks for coming on tonight. Thanks to our panelists for helping out. And follow us on socials for the next one.